I watched my parents' faces drain of colour as I stepped off the stage with my hard-earned MBA. My sister Emma looked equally shocked, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. None of them had expected this moment. Me graduating from Wharton, with highest honours, and certainly not the announcement that followed. And now I'd like to recognise Morgan Taylor, this year's recipient of the Anderson Family Scholarship, who has also secured a position at Goldman Sachs. The same parents who had told me, "We just can't afford your education," while paying every penny for my sister's 4 years at NYU, were now staring at the stranger their incapable daughter had become. But their shock was nothing compared to what I had planned for the celebration dinner. If you're watching this right now, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey of family betrayal and long-awaited justice. I still remember trembling as I walked across that stage, knowing the truth was finally going to come out. If you've ever been the family scapegoat while watching someone else be the golden child, you know exactly how I felt. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you want more stories about family karma finally coming full circle. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I was 12 years old when my sister Emma was born. I remember the excitement I felt, helping my mom Diana decorate the nursery with butterflies and flowers, imagining all the things I would teach my little sister. My father Richard beamed with pride, showing off photos of his little princess to everyone at his accounting firm. Those early years seemed normal enough. Our family lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a nice Connecticut suburb. Dad worked as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Hartford, while Mum sold real estate part-time. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough for annual family vacations to Florida, new clothes for school each year, and the occasional splurge on things that mattered. The first hint that something wasn't quite right came around my 14th birthday. I'd asked for a laptop for school, nothing fancy, just something for writing papers and research. My parents hesitated, telling me they needed to think about the expense. 2 weeks later, they came home with a beautiful handcrafted dollhouse for 2-year-old Emma, who was too young to even appreciate it. When I pointed this out, my mother patted my shoulder and said, "You're so mature for your age, Morgan. Emma needs these little joys more than you do." This pattern continued throughout my high school years. While I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, served as class president for 3 years straight, and captained the debate team to state championships, my accomplishments were met with perfunctory praise. "That's nice, honey," or "We expected nothing." Less was all I'd get before the conversation shifted to Emma's finger painting, or how adorable she looked at her dance recital. When I turned 16, I asked about getting a car like many of my friends were. My parents explained that I would need to work for it. I took a job at the local library, saving every penny for 10 months to buy a used Honda Civic that constantly broke down. 2 years later, on Emma's 16th birthday, my parents surprised her with a brand new Volkswagen Beetle, complete with custom seat covers and a premium sound system. "Emma isn't as responsible as you," my father explained when I couldn't hide my hurt. "She needs the reliability of a new car for safety reasons." By my senior year of high school, the disparity had become impossible to ignore. I was applying to colleges, sweeping academic awards, and working 20 hours a week, while Emma struggled to maintain a C average. Yet every minor accomplishment of hers was celebrated with dinner out or special gifts, while my achievements were simply expected. "You're so independent, Morgan," became my mother's constant refrain, as if my competence justified their neglect. "Emma needs more encouragement." I channeled my frustration into excellence, believing that if I just achieved enough, they would finally see me. I applied to 12 prestigious universities, writing scholarship essays late into the night after finishing my homework and work shifts. When acceptance letters started arriving, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, I thought finally, they would be proud. Instead, I walked into the most devastating conversation of my young life. "Honey," my father said one evening, sitting me down at our kitchen table, "we need to talk about these college acceptances." I smiled, waiting for the praise, the celebration, maybe even an admission that they had misjudged me all these years. "We're very proud," my mother began, not quite meeting my eyes. But we need to be practical about finances. My smile faltered. What do you mean? We just don't have college. Funds set aside for you, my father said, shuffling papers in front of him. These Ivy League schools, even with partial scholarships, they're just not in our budget. I stared at them, uncomprehending. My whole life had been building toward this moment. Every late night studying, every weekend sacrificed, every exhausting hour at my part-time job, all with the promise that education was the one thing they would always support. But I struggled to find words. What about the college fund Grandpa talked about? He told me years ago he'd contributed to it. My parents exchanged a quick glance that I couldn't interpret at the time. That money had to be reallocated, my father said firmly. The kitchen renovation last year, some investments that didn't pan out. We're sorry, Morgan, but you'll need to consider state schools and more scholarships. I nodded numbly, retreating to my room where I cried silently into my pillow. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would find a way forward, with or without their support. Little did I know that this wasn't just about financial limitations. It was the first major betrayal in a pattern that would take me years to fully uncover. The rejection from my parents hit me like a physical blow. I had been accepted to my dream schools. Princeton was my top choice, offering a partial scholarship that would cover about 40% of the costs. I had naively assumed my parents would help with the rest, or at least co-sign loans. After all, they had always emphasized the importance of education. Instead, I found myself enrolling at Connecticut State University, the only option I could afford with my savings and the academic scholarship I'd earned. I took the maximum course load each semester and worked 30 hours a week across 2 jobs, shelving books at the university library during days and waiting tables at Applebee's on evenings and weekends. My typical day started at 5 in the morning with 2 hours of studying before my first class at 8. I'd attend lectures until 2, work at the library until 6, then rush to Applebee's for the dinner shift until midnight. After closing, I'd squeeze in another hour of homework before collapsing into bed, only to start again 5 hours later. Weekends meant double shifts at the restaurant and marathon study sessions in between. While other students were attending football games, joining clubs, or simply enjoying the college experience, I was calculating tips and highlighting textbooks during my breaks. I rarely went home during those first 3 years of college, claiming work commitments when holiday gatherings came around. The truth was I couldn't bear to see my parents, to be reminded of their betrayal. But during my junior year, Thanksgiving coincided with my manager giving me unexpected time off, and I reluctantly made the drive home. Nothing could have prepared me for what I found. Emma was in her senior year of high school, applying to colleges. Herself. Over turkey and stuffing, she casually mentioned her top choice, New York University, an expensive private school in one of the most costly cities in America. We've already put the deposit down, my mother announced proudly. Emma's going to have an apartment in Manhattan. We want her to have the full college experience. I nearly choked on my cranberry sauce. How are you affording that? The words slipped out before I could stop them. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My father cleared his throat. We've made some financial arrangements, took out a second mortgage on the house. A second mortgage? I repeated, my voice hollow. For NYU? When you couldn't help me with Princeton? It's different with Emma, my mother said, her tone suddenly defensive. She's not as academically gifted as you. She needs the prestigious degree more than you did. You'll be fine wherever you go, my father added with a dismissive wave. Emma needs every advantage she can get. I excused myself from the table and locked myself in my childhood bathroom, pressing my fist against my mouth to keep from screaming. Through the door, I could hear the conversation continuing as if nothing had happened. My parents asking Emma about which Manhattan neighborhood she preferred, discussing furniture for her apartment, planning shopping trips for her college, wardrobe. That night, I lay awake in my old bedroom, surrounded by the debate trophies and academic medals my parents had never really valued. I thought about Emma's C+ average and how she'd never held a job. I thought about my parents taking out a second mortgage, risking their home, for her education when they couldn't spare a dime for mine. Something didn't add up. My parents weren't struggling financially, not with their careers, our comfortable home, and their ability to take lavish vacations. And what about the college fund my grandfather had mentioned years ago? As the night deepened, so did my resolve. I wasn't just going to accept their explanations anymore. I was going to find out the truth about our family finances, about why I had been treated as an afterthought while Emma received everything. The next morning, I changed my spring semester schedule, adding accounting and finance classes to my English major. If I was going to understand what was really happening with my family's money, I needed to learn to speak their language. I didn't know it then, but this decision would not only reveal the truth I sought, it would completely change the course of my life. My new finance and accounting classes opened up a world I never knew I had an aptitude for. Numbers that might have confused others made perfect sense to me, and I found myself excelling in these courses even more than my English literature classes. By the end of that spring semester, I had changed my major to business with a concentration in finance, a decision that raised no eyebrows at home since my parents rarely asked about my studies. During spring break, instead of heading to the beach like other students, I went home with a mission. While my parents were at work, I systematically went through their home office, taking photos of any financial documents I could find. I discovered old tax returns, investment statements, mortgage papers, and bank records. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, but I knew something wasn't right. Among a stack of old correspondence in my father's filing cabinet, I found several letters from my grandfather dating back to my childhood. One in particular caught my eye, written when I was 8 years old, mentioning a specific trust fund he had established for my education. The amount mentioned was substantial, $75,000, which by the time I reached college age should have grown significantly. For Morgan's bright future, my grandfather had written. This money is specifically for her education and cannot be used for any other purpose. My hands trembled as I read those words. There had been money set aside for me, money that my parents claimed didn't exist or had been reallocated. This wasn't just favoritism, this was theft. Over. The next year I became a financial detective in my own family. I scheduled visits home around times when I knew my parents would be busy, using these opportunities to gather more evidence. I borrowed statements from their desks, photographed documents, and slowly pieced together the truth. The bombshell came during Christmas break of my senior year. In a locked drawer in my father's desk, the key to which he kept hidden in the same spot since I was a child, I found documents relating to an inheritance from my maternal grandmother who had passed away when I was 14. She had left a significant sum specifically designated for my education, over $100,000 that I had never known about. Further digging revealed multiple accounts, investment portfolios, and assets that contradicted everything. My parents had told me about their financial situation. They weren't struggling to make ends meet. They were upper middle class with substantial savings and investments. The financial arrangements they claimed couldn't be made for my education had absolutely been possible. Most damning of all were the detailed records of expenses for Emma, her Manhattan apartment lease showing $2,400 monthly rent, credit card statements revealing shopping sprees at designer stores, receipts for spring break, trips to Cancun and Paris, all funded directly by my parents. In 1 year, they had spent more on Emma's college experience than my entire 4-year education had cost. This wasn't about financial necessity. My parents had chosen to invest everything in Emma while leaving me to fend for myself. I needed to confirm what I suspected, so I arranged lunch with my grandfather during that same break. We met at his favourite diner, and after some small talk, I carefully broached the subject. "Grandpa, I found some old letters where you mentioned setting up a college fund for me." His eyebrows shot up, but he didn't seem surprised by the question. "Yes, I did. Set aside $75,000 when you were little. Your grandmother added to it before she passed too. Did you know I'm working 2 jobs to pay for state college while Mum and Dad took out a second mortgage for Emma to go to NYU? His face darkened. "Morgan, I've had my suspicions about how your parents handle finances between you girls. It's not my place to interfere in how they raise their children. Even if they misused money that was specifically designated for me? I pressed. He sighed heavily. I should have set up a formal trust that they couldn't access until you were in college. That's my mistake. But Morgan, he reached across the table to take my hand. Don't let this embitter you. Family is still family. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Family is still family, but my family had been lying to me for years, taking what was meant for me and giving it to my sister. After graduating with my business degree from Connecticut State, I made a strategic decision. Instead of immediately pursuing a higher-paying job, I transferred to a community college to take additional finance courses while working even more hours to save money. To my parents, this looked like I was floundering, unable to launch a successful career, exactly the narrative they had always believed about me compared to Emma's potential. In reality, I was laying the groundwork for something much bigger. The quiet, accommodating daughter they thought they knew was gone. In her place was a woman with a plan and the financial knowledge to execute it. After discovering the extent of my parents' deception, I knew I needed more than just righteous anger. I needed a strategy. Community college became my cover while I worked to rebuild my future from the ground up. My approach was simple but required immense discipline. Excel academically, build financial independence, and let no one in my family know what I was really doing. In my advanced finance course, I caught the attention of Professor Jenkins, a former Wall Street executive who had retired to teach. After I aced his notoriously difficult midterm exam, he asked me to stay after class. You have a natural talent for this, he said, studying me with keen eyes. But you're at community college after already earning a bachelor's degree. What's your story, Morgan? Something about his direct approach broke through my carefully constructed walls. Before I knew it, I was telling him everything. The favoritism, the stolen education funds, my determination to succeed despite it all. Instead of offering sympathy, he offered opportunity. I still have connections at several top business schools. With your grades and obvious aptitude, you could aim much higher than this. Under Professor Jenkins' mentorship, I began secretly applying to prestigious MBA programs. During the day, I worked at a local investment firm where I quickly impressed the senior management with my analytical skills. Evenings were spent crafting applications, writing essays, and studying for the GMAT. All the while, I maintained the facade at family gatherings. I became the agreeable, unambitious daughter they expected me to be. Community college is really working out for me, I would say with a carefully crafted smile. It's more my speed anyway. My mother would nod knowingly. Not everyone is cut out for high-pressure careers. There's no shame in finding your comfort level. These comments stung, but I used the pain to fuel my determination. Every dismissive remark, every comparison to Emma became another brick in the foundation I was building. Speaking of Emma, she graduated from NYU with average grades and, predictably, no job prospects. My parents funded her apartment in Manhattan while she found herself through a series of short-lived enthusiasms, first a food blog that lasted 3 weeks, then an attempt at fashion journalism that produced 2 articles, followed by an interest in becoming a yoga instructor that ended after 1 class. Emma just needs time to find her passion, my mother explained during a rare family dinner I attended. Not everyone knows their path right away. I nodded, hiding my bitterness behind a sip of wine. The double standard was glaring. I had always been expected to be self-sufficient, while Emma was given endless resources and patience to discover herself. Then came the news that my parents had taken out another loan, this time against their retirement accounts, to fund Emma's fashion startup. This venture consisted mainly of an expensive camera, a MacBook Pro, and a website that never launched. While this was happening, I received the letter that would change everything. Acceptance to Wharton's MBA program with a full scholarship based on academic merit and financial need. Professor Jenkins had written a recommendation so glowing it had caught the attention of the Anderson family, major donors to the business school, who selected 1 student annually for their prestigious scholarship. When the Andersons invited me to dinner to discuss the scholarship, I was struck by how they treated me, with respect, interest, and genuine belief in my potential. Mrs. Anderson, a formidable investment banker herself, spent 2 hours discussing market trends with me, never once speaking down or assuming I couldn't follow complex concepts. "You remind me of myself at your age," she said warmly, determined to succeed no matter what obstacles are placed in your way. For the first time, I felt truly seen for who I was and what I could accomplish. The contrast between the Andersons' treatment and my own family's was stark and painful. I accepted the scholarship and made arrangements to begin my MBA program, telling no one in my family where I was really going. To them, I was taking courses. In Philadelphia, while working remotely. Technically true, but deliberately vague. If you've ever had to hide your true potential from the people who should have been your biggest supporters, you know how bittersweet this victory felt. I was moving toward an amazing future, but I couldn't share my excitement with my family. Drop a comment if you've ever had to downplay your success around people who couldn't handle seeing you shine. Sometimes the loneliest part of proving people wrong is doing it in silence, but trust me, the moment they finally see who you've become is worth every second of waiting. My 2 years at Wharton were transformative in ways I couldn't have imagined. I arrived as a determined but wounded young woman with something to prove, and I emerged as a confident professional with a clear vision for my future. From the moment I stepped onto campus, I approached every class, networking event and project as an opportunity to reinvent myself. I threw myself into my studies with singular focus, earning the highest marks in core classes like advanced financial management and strategic decision-making. Professors began to take notice, often asking me to contribute insights during discussions or lead group projects. Where I had once hidden my intelligence to avoid my parents' indifference, I now embraced it fully. The Andersons didn't just provide financial support, they became the mentors my parents never were. George Anderson invited me to shadow him at his investment firm during spring break, introducing me to partners and clients as the future of finance. His wife Caroline regularly sent books she thought would interest me, with thoughtful notes, highlighting passages she found particularly relevant to my goals. "You have a gift for seeing patterns others miss," George told me after I identified an overlooked opportunity in one of their portfolio companies. "That intuition, combined with your analytical skills, will take you far." When the time came, for summer internships after my first year, the Andersons connected me with Goldman Sachs. The interview process was grueling, 6 rounds with increasingly senior executives, each one probing my knowledge, judgment, and ability to think under pressure. I prepared meticulously, spending weeks researching the firm and practicing responses to potential questions. My hard work paid off. I not only secured the internship, but was singled out for the firm's accelerated leadership track, typically reserved for graduates of Harvard and Yale, with family connections to the industry. By the end of the summer, I had received a formal job offer for after graduation, with a starting salary and bonus package that indeed exceeded my parents' combined annual income. Throughout this period, my communication with my family remained minimal and superficial. Monthly phone calls with my mother consisted mainly of updates about Emma's latest ventures, a podcast that recorded 3 episodes, a jewellery design business that produced 2 necklaces, a brief stint as a personal assistant to a minor celebrity that ended when she repeatedly showed up late. "Emma's just exploring," my mother would say, oblivious to the irony. "Not everyone can be satisfied with a conventional path like yours." If she only knew. During holiday visits, I played my part perfectly, the dutiful but unremarkable daughter, who had settled for less. I spoke vaguely about my courses and my job, never revealing the prestigious names attached to either. When pressed about my future plans, I would shrug and say I was still figuring things out, a phrase that had earned Emma endless support, but got me dismissive nods. "At least you're realistic about your capabilities," my father once commented, after I deliberately understated a professional accomplishment. These moments were harder than I expected. Despite knowing the truth, despite my growing success, their casual dismissal still had the power to wound me. There were nights in my Philadelphia apartment when I questioned my entire plan. Was I being petty, Unnecessarily secretive? Would it be better to simply tell them about Wharton, about Goldman Sachs, about the Andersons? But then I would remember the documents I'd found, the inheritance that had been kept from me, the second mortgage for Emma's education that they'd claimed they couldn't afford for mine. This wasn't about seeking approval anymore. It was about justice, about finally being seen for who I truly was. As graduation approached, I debated whether to invite my family at all. The Andersons would be there, as would Professor Jenkins and several colleagues from Goldman Sachs who had become friends. Did I want my parents and Emma to witness this moment? Finally, I decided they should be there. Not for my sake, but for theirs. They needed to see the daughter they had underestimated. They needed to face the consequences of their choices. I sent a casual email 3 weeks before the ceremony. I'm finishing up my program in Philadelphia next month. There's a small graduation ceremony if you want to come. No pressure. My mother replied almost immediately. Of course we'll be there, honey. Emma has been wanting to visit Philadelphia anyway. Send us the details. I provided the bare minimum. Information. Date, time, location. I didn't mention Wharton. I didn't mention honours. I certainly didn't mention that I would be singled out during the ceremony as the Anderson Scholar, or that I had already secured a position that most business students would kill for. As I tried on my graduation gown in my apartment the week C. Before the ceremony, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the exhausted, heartbroken girl who had once cried over her parents' betrayal. I had transformed not just my circumstances, but myself. The Andersons had arranged for professional photographs to be taken after the ceremony, followed by a celebration dinner at Philadelphia's most exclusive restaurant. My family didn't know about either. They didn't know a lot of things, yet. But they would. Soon, very soon, they would know everything. May 15th dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for graduation. I woke early, too keyed up to sleep, and spent an hour going through my carefully prepared notes for the day. Every detail mattered, from the precisely timed arrival of each, guest to the seating arrangement at dinner. Today, years of planning would finally come to fruition. The graduation ceremony was held in Wharton's historic courtyard, with rows of chairs arranged beneath flowering trees. I spotted my family as they arrived. My father in his standard navy suit, my mother in a floral dress she'd worn to countless functions, and Emma trailing behind them, already looking bored as she scrolled through her phone. They took seats, near the back, not bothering to check the reserved section where name cards had been placed for them. The Andersons arrived shortly after, impeccably dressed and carrying a gift bag. My grandfather followed, moving slowly with his cane but beaming with pride. They found their reserved seats in the front row exactly as planned. As the ceremony began, I sat with my fellow graduates, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. The dean spoke about achievement and potential, about the select few who had distinguished themselves during their time at Wharton. And then, I'd like to recognise this year's recipient of the Anderson Family Scholarship for outstanding achievement in finance. This student maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA while completing 2 independent research projects, serving as a teaching assistant for 3 graduate courses, and securing one of only 2 positions offered by Goldman Sachs in their executive investment division. Please join me in congratulating Morgan Taylor. The applause was enthusiastic as I walked across the stage. I kept my eyes fixed on my parents, watching as confusion gave way to shock on their faces. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear his vision. Emma's phone dropped into her lap, forgotten. The dean continued. Morgan has also been selected as this year's student speaker, an honour reserved for the graduate who best exemplifies the values and excellence of the Wharton School of Business. This was not part of my plan. The speaker had fallen ill the day before, and the dean had asked me to step in just hours earlier. I had hastily prepared remarks, seeing it as an opportunity too perfect to pass up. As I stepped to the podium, I looked directly at my family for the first time. Thank you, Dean Williams. I'm honoured to represent the Wharton MBA class of 2023 today. I paused, letting the name of the prestigious business school hang in the air. My journey here wasn't traditional. I didn't come from wealth or connections. In fact, for many years, I was told explicitly and implicitly that I wasn't capable of this level of achievement. I saw my mother shift uncomfortably in her seat. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through undergraduate education. I studied late into the night after exhausting shifts. I saved every penny while watching others receive opportunities I could only dream of. Another pause, including members of my own family. My father's face had gone from pale to crimson. But today isn't about resentment. It's about resilience. It's about proving that your origin story doesn't define your ending. It's about showing that sometimes the people who should believe in you the most are the ones who see you the least, and that their failure to see your potential says more about them than it ever could about you. The audience applauded, unaware of the private drama unfolding within my words. I finished with standard congratulations to my fellow graduates and stepped down from the podium, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice having remained steady throughout. After the ceremony, as graduates and families mingled in the courtyard, my parents approached me with expressions I couldn't quite read, somewhere between anger, confusion, and an attempt at pride. "Wharton?" my father said, his voice low. "You've been at Wharton this whole time. How could you afford this?" Before I could answer, the Andersons appeared at my side. "Morgan, darling, congratulations." Caroline embraced me warmly while George shook my hand. "We couldn't be prouder," George said, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. 2 years of absolute excellence. My mother's smile was brittle. "And you are?" "George and Caroline Anderson," I said smoothly. "The donors of my full scholarship and my mentors, they're joining us for dinner tonight." "Dinner?" My mother blinked. "We were just going to take you to the Olive Garden to celebrate." I smiled, enjoying the moment perhaps more than I should have. "I've made reservations at La Maison, 7 o'clock. The Andersons and Grandpa will be joining us." At the mention of my grandfather, my parents' expressions changed again. He had been watching our exchange from a few feet away and now approached, hugging me tightly. "I always knew you had greatness in you," he said, loud enough for my parents to hear. Emma, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "So you've been lying to us? Pretending to be at community college while you were actually here?" Her tone was accusatory, but I detected something else beneath it. Hurt, perhaps, or fear. "I never lied," I replied calmly. "I said I was taking courses in Philadelphia. I was. I just didn't specify which institution or what degree." "But why wouldn't you tell us?" my mother demanded, her voice rising slightly. "We're your family." I met her gaze steadily. "We can discuss that at dinner. I think you'll find I had my reasons." The reception continued awkwardly, with my parents attempting to claim credit for my success to anyone who would listen. "We always encouraged her independence," my father told one of my professors. "Made her stand on her own 2 feet." I let these comments slide, knowing that dinner would bring all the confrontation I needed. As we prepared to leave the reception, I saw Emma frantically texting, her thumbs flying over her phone screen. I didn't need to see the messages to know. She was in panic mode, perhaps sensing that the family dynamic she had benefited from for so long was about to be upended. The stage was set. In just a few hours, at a table at Philadelphia's most exclusive restaurant, surrounded by witnesses, they couldn't dismiss or intimidate. My parents would finally face the truth of what they had done, and the daughter they had underestimated. La Maison occupied the top floor of Philadelphia's tallest building, offering panoramic views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white-clothed tables and elegant place settings. It was exactly the type of establishment my parents would find intimidating, and that was precisely why I had chosen it. The maitre d' led us to a private dining area I had reserved months in advance. Place cards arranged by me ensured my parents were seated, directly across from the Andersons, with my grandfather at one end of the table and me at the other. Emma was placed between our father and George Anderson, looking increasingly uncomfortable as she realised she couldn't escape whatever was coming. My mother attempted small talk as the first course arrived, a delicate seafood amuse-bouche that she eyed with suspicion. "So, Morgan has always been our independent one," she said to Caroline Anderson. "We knew she'd find her way eventually." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Independent indeed. Morgan tells me she worked 2 jobs throughout undergraduate school while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. That's more than finding her way. That's extraordinary determination." My father jumped in. "We always taught her the value of hard work." "Among other lessons," I said quietly, taking a sip of water. The conversation continued in this vein through the appetizer course, my parents attempting to rewrite history, the Andersons subtly challenging their narrative, and me biding my time. Emma remained uncharacteristically silent, her eyes darting between speakers like she was watching a tennis match. As the main course was served, filet mignon for most of us, though Emma had requested a special vegetarian option, I decided the moment had arrived. I gently tapped my knife against my water glass, drawing everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," I said, raising my glass. "To education, to opportunity, and to truth." Everyone raised their glasses somewhat uncertainly. "Speaking of truth," I continued, setting my glass down, "I think it's time we talk about how I actually got here." The table fell silent. My mother's smile froze on her face. "Mum, Dad, you've spent the evening implying that you supported my educational journey, that you somehow contributed to my success at Wharton. That's not just revisionist history, it's a complete fabrication." My father's face darkened. "Morgan, this isn't the time or place." "Actually, it's exactly the time and place," I interrupted, reaching into the leather portfolio I had placed beside my chair. "I've waited years for this conversation, and I've chosen to have it here now with witnesses who won't allow you to gaslight me as you've done my entire life." I removed a folder containing copies of all the documents I had gathered over the years. "Let's start with this." I slid a paper across the table toward my parents. "A letter from Grandpa dated 15 years ago, detailing the $75,000 he contributed to my college fund. Money you told me didn't exist when I was accepted to Princeton." My grandfather nodded solemnly. "I set that aside, specifically for Morgan's education. It should have been more than enough for undergraduate tuition at the time." My mother's face had gone pale. "We had to use that money for family expenses. Times were tough." "Were they?" I pushed another document toward them. "This is your financial statement from that same year. You had over $300,000 in investments and savings. You took a 2-week vacation to Hawaii that cost $15,000. Tough times seems like an exaggeration." I turned to Emma, whose wide eyes revealed she hadn't known any of this. "I don't blame you for this, Emma. You were a child when these decisions were made. But you should know that our parents took out a second mortgage on their house to send you to NYU and pay for your Manhattan apartment, while telling me they couldn't afford to help me with college at all." Emma looked at our parents in confusion. "Is that true?" My father tried to regain control of the situation. "Morgan, you're taking things out of context. Financial decisions are complicated." "Then let me simplify things," I said, removing another document. "This is Grandmother's will, leaving $100,000 specifically for my education. Money I never saw a penny of. Where did I'd go?" The silence that followed was deafening. "It went to the lake house," my grandfather said finally, his voice heavy with disappointment. "They used Morgan's inheritance to buy the vacation property in Vermont." My mother gasped. "Dad, that's not—" "It's exactly what happened," he cut her off. "I've kept quiet for years because I thought it wasn't my place to interfere. But I won't sit here and watch you lie to her face about money that was legally and morally hers." Throughout dinner, I methodically presented each piece of evidence as a new course was served. Bank statements showing transfers from my designated accounts to general family funds. Credit card statements revealing Emma's shopping sprees in Manhattan while I worked double shifts to afford textbooks. tax returns demonstrating our family's comfortable financial position despite their claims of hardship. The Andersons watched this unfold with quiet sympathy, occasionally asking clarifying questions that prevented my parents from dismissing or derailing the conversation. Their presence was crucial, as wealthy, respected figures in the financial world. They couldn't be intimidated or fooled by my parents' excuses. "Let me be clear," I said as dessert was served. "I'm not doing this for money. I don't need or want anything from you now. My education is complete, paid for by scholarships I earned and people who actually believed in me. My career is launched. I start at Goldman Sachs next month with a compensation package that frankly dwarfs anything you could offer me." "Then why all this?" my father demanded, gesturing at the documents spread across the table. "Why ambush us like this if not for money?" "For accountability," I said simply. "For acknowledgement of what you did. You diverted funds specifically, designated for my education to other purposes. You lied to me about family finances. You made me work myself to exhaustion while giving Emma everything on a silver platter.